Sure. Let me know. Everybody ready? First of all, thank you all. A greater message to Houston. This is where I was born. This is where my father and my stepmother lived their entire lives. And I think we've all experienced a very difficult time with this case. We've all certainly have been in a position where we question the men and women that are supposed to protect us. I think we can all find solace in knowing that we've found some closure and we've found some of the bad police officers and have set a precedence for moving forward for all law enforcement, that they will be held accountable if they are violating their citizens' civil rights and their, of course, ability to live peacefully. And I know my father would definitely have the message that he supports law enforcement because he knows 99% of them are definitely good. And we all commend all of them for that very difficult job. And I think ultimately there's a lot of good that will come out of this. We've clearly discovered a bunch of mishandling of police work, and we're going to make it better. I think moving forward, we're definitely going to get to see some improvement from law enforcement. But again, we are thankful for all of those law enforcement who do a good job and are honorable. We thank you for that.
Ryan, do you feel like a heavy burden has finally been lifted off the family's chest and reputation?
Yeah, sure. There's the burdens. It's been 5.5 years of waiting with little answer and with honestly with a heavy burden of my father's and my stepmother's name being tarnished as drug dealers, which they absolutely are not and never were. So I think there's some vindication, of course, to get that dark cloud lifted off of our family name.
How would you like for them to be remembered? I know you talked a little bit about that in court, but if you want to.
Sure. I'd love for them to be remembered for who they were. They were great people. I think the very obvious, as soon as this happened, the neighbors were the ones that blew this case right out of the water. Immediately, they all knew that they were not drug dealers. They all knew that they were good people. And you know, they were ill. They had illnesses. They had injuries. But they're making the best with what they had and living their lives peacefully, happily until this happened.
Talk a little bit about your victim impact statement. Could you just repeat a little bit of what you said, especially the part I was interested in where you're asking for a public apology from Chief Acevedo? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's definitely, when this first came out, we heard from a lot of public figures that accusing my father, Dennis Tuttle, and Nicholas Reggie Nicholas, of being drug dealers, and they are not. And we would expect a public apology, exonerating them, and for their quick, uneducated verdicts on innocent civilians, good people.
You made a request, let me rephrase that, you provided an opportunity to the defendant to speak up at the very end, and he stayed silent. Did you anticipate that he might actually provide something to your family?
I was certainly hopeful. Listen, I think the man lived a double life. I think his family and friends knew a very different version of him in a professional setting. Clearly, he was not a professional, and he was a bad person. He's negatively impacted thousands of people's lives, including his own families and including mine, and giving them the chance to say something, to answer some questions, to give us some motive, closure. I wanted to at least give him the opportunity. He declined.
Houstonians have been asking me that we never heard why. Why Reggie? Why Dennis? Did your families hear why?
Not in this case, no. We still have questions.
What
I would
questions?
say, well, that's the big one. What is the motive? You know, why their house? What was? We know that it was baseless, but we don't have an answer as far as what the motive was. Hopefully, we'll continue to press and maybe someday get an answer.
What was it like? Just sitting through 5 weeks every day, listening to all the stuff. Some of it good, a lot of it really terrible about people you love.
I think my takeaway is that justice is messy. Justice sometimes takes time. I think we hear about it in the media and movies, shows, but in the end, I have more faith than ever in our justice system, that there are people that are looking out, even when it comes to blue on blue, which has got to be probably one of the most difficult things for a state prosecutor. But you know, our country is formed on honorable people, and we have to sometimes make sure that they stay that way and hold them accountable.
And when you looked at him from the witness stand just now, what did you see?
Yeah, I saw a broken man. And I'd like to see some more remorse. I'm not sure that I really saw that.
Can you make eye contact?
With me? Today? No, never.
Why do you think 60 years is the correct sentence?
60 years, that's, well, that's a life sentence for him. He's 61 years old, so you know, he took 2 lives. And for that, he's paying with his, and he'll be in jail. I think it was an appropriate and fair sentence.
And I know this is extremely difficult for you and your family. Is it even more difficult because he was a police officer?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's, him being a police officer, we have utmost faith in that, and anybody can be bad at their job, but this is malice. This is complete disregard, and it's ultimately a lack of leadership, and there was clearly an environment where this was allowed to happen, and that has to be corrected. And if it's happening in Houston, it's happening everywhere. We have to set precedents, and we have to make sure this stops.
Did anybody in the family talk to Joanne Nicholas?
Oh, not just yet, but we
Not
will.
yet.
We'll look forward to that.
Kim, did you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan Tuttle. People hate public corruption. And the people of this county have sent a strong message that police corruption will not be tolerated and that no one is above the law. Prosecuting cops is about the hardest thing that prosecutors can do. We work with them daily. We're usually on the same team. We appreciate the Rangers in this situation and those members of HPD that assisted, but I want to tell you that it was my staff and this office and these prosecutors that you see in front of you and probably 45 more individuals who worked this case up, and the other cases against the other cops, which remain quashed. Their indictments remain quashed, but those investigations remain open on the other 10 members of Squad 15. Hope they hear me. Gerald Goins has been a stain on the reputation of every honest cop in our community, a community that he terrorized through corruption worthy of the movie Training Day. He had throw-down weapons. He had throw-down drugs. He killed and was responsible for the deaths of these two people and the ruination of many, many more. The Mallet brothers and several others have been exonerated, but we know there are more of you out there. We've given the most notice that we know how to tell people who were victims of Gerald Goins, if you were wrongfully convicted, come forward. Lawyers can be appointed. Imagine being in your own home with your spouse and your family dog at about the time that school kids are walking home from school and a home invasion occurs. But it's not street criminals, it's the police department. The Tuttles and, well, Reggie, Nicholas, and Dennis Tuttle were committing no crime. They were in their home. They were trying to live peacefully. They were as ordinary as you and I. And yet they were murdered. And all because of a corrupt cop. You all, I want to say that in my 37 years and with all the lawyers we've talked to, this is the most important verdict in Harris County history. No police officer that any of us have been able to look up, find, remember, has ever been convicted of murder in Harris County. And that's because people want to believe in the police. That's who we're trained to trust from the time we're little. So imagine the damage done to the communities in Houston that suffered under Squad 15 and under Gerald Goins for the last 20 years. Imagine the grief of these families who had to listen to criminal defense lawyers drag their families' names through the mud for the last 5.5 years. It's at best insult upon injury. And I want to take this minute to thank the two families, the Tuttles and the Nicholases, for their incredible courage, for their incredible endurance and strength in waiting for this day to come. And I want to thank the people of Harris County who show up for jury duty, who come here instead of going to work, instead of picking up their kids from school, and they sacrifice to do justice. This is the American way. And nothing can be harder, really, than convicting somebody who you've been trained to trust since you were a small child. The evidence was overwhelming. The skill of these lawyers is untouchable. So I want to thank Tanisha Manning, and I want to thank Keaton Forsch, our trial team, and I want to thank all of the other lawyers who've worked in our Civil Rights Division and worked on this. Natasha Sinclair was a great leader throughout much of this. Jules Johnson, Michael Harris, Candace Freeman, investigators, Art Marinas. So many people to thank for doing their job. It's just not an easy job. And they got it done. And the people of Harris County have spoken, and they have set the bar very high for corrupt cops. So I would say this is a great day for the honest cops and prosecutors who work in this system every day, all day, to see that justice is done. And it's a strong message to anybody out there who's thinking about cutting corners as a cop or violating people's rights in order to simply make an arrest so they can get credit for it in this war on drugs that's failed miserably. I want to thank everyone in the media for your attention to the case, your great respect that you've paid for the family and for our prosecutors, and to my colleagues and the leadership in in the DA's office. This is not an easy decision to make, to go forward against a team of police officers, against the Houston Police Department and the Police Department Union and all the lawyers that that they could bring on. And I just appreciate the courage that it took of these prosecutors, the investigators, and everybody who worked on this case to make this day, make it right for the Tuttles and for the Nicholases. And to see that Gerald Goins is going to prison for 60 years, which in Texas is life. That's the cost of corruption.
Amen.
Tanisha Keaton?
I don't have much to say that the jury didn't. We're certainly appreciative to the jury, the dedication, the hard work. They put their time, their heart into this, and I'll let the verdict speak for itself.
I can echo that. You know, Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The jury got it. And we're very appreciative of that.
Was
What
there,
was going through your mind when you guys were arguing this very long trial, long process? Doubts, concerns?
No, the evidence spoke for itself. The families behind us, the leadership behind us, and again, back to the evidence. When you actually take an unbiased look at the evidence, there shouldn't be any doubts.
And Tanisha, you talked about, the one point I was wanting you talked about how just because someone might have been in River Oaks, that doesn't mean the justice should be equal, whether you hang out in River Oaks or in the Third Ward. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Goins preyed on predominantly poor communities who may or may not have the resources to fight back. You didn't see this kind of thing happening in a River Oaks, a West University, and some of the neighborhoods where you or I may frequent. He preyed on neighborhoods that were, as I said, predominantly poor. And the people who are in those neighborhoods deserve the same protections that everyone else deserves.
well, you indicated just now that the facts speak for themselves. This was truly a very complex case. How much of this was about getting justice for Dennis and Regina, but at the same time understanding the magnitude of what this case means for law enforcement and the community as a whole?
Go ahead.
You know, Mario, when you have spent time with these two families and when you see the toll that the injustice has taken on both of these families, that's motivation enough. But we also work side by side with law enforcement on a day-to-day basis, and there are some tremendous law enforcement officials out there. This is not an indictment against police officers. We know that there are 99% upstanding police officers. This was also about sending a message to them that we believe in them, we support them. What we don't support is corruption.
Mike, are you guys also
Keaton, can you
still
elaborate a
active
little bit on
in law?
that?
Do
I
you
mean,
have-
obviously you were working very closely with Tanisha. You guys were partners here. I mean, this is aside from a massive victory, a unique victory, it's also a message that's being sent to law enforcement.
It is, and I'll echo what Tanisha said. This has never been about anything other than these two families behind me. But of course, the ramifications, we don't ignore that there are bigger ramifications. And I think it's just as important to look at you, the media, and to have the police department hear us say, we are behind you. We are not behind the people that don't represent the characteristics that those with integrity represent.
And I know you guys looked extensively for a motive. What have you been able to come up with? And I know you briefly touched on that in closing.
Well, thankfully for us, we don't have to prove a motive. Didn't mean we didn't want to find a motive, but our question for this jury is who is responsible and not why. And they answered that pretty quickly. I think when you ask yourself what is behind the motive, only one person knows that. He has a Fifth Amendment right not to let us know what that motive was, and we respect that.
How powerful was this jury in terms of being able to see through the smoke that was being tossed in their direction?
I don't want to step on Tanisha's toes, and I want her to comment on this as well, because I think we both hold that jury in the highest regard possible. They continuously had the opportunity to look outside the courtroom for other evidence, and they repeatedly did not take that opportunity, repeatedly stayed focused on what happened in that courtroom, and they have told us repeatedly through their verdict that what they were focused on here is justice for both the Tuttles and Regina Nicholas's family and for Goins.
On Monday, when you both returned, you urged the jury to not be manipulated. That was immediately after the apparent medical episode that Gerald Goins had. Do you believe that was a manipulation?
We'll never know. What we can tell you is that Gerald Goins had a pattern of behavior, and our concern was that the jury does not get sidetracked by any sort of behavior. So we'll never know whether that was a legitimate medical concern or whether or not that was more of the same from Gerald Goins. The bottom line is we didn't want the jury distracted by that, which is why we didn't go into it at all. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The facts and the evidence in this case is what matters, and that's what we wanted the jury to focus on and remain focused on. All of the rest, as Mario said, is just side smoke.
Can you clarify if something happened sparking yesterday's motion regarding the physical restraints?
That'd probably be a better question for people that are on his side. We were focused on our closing statements, and we were focused on making sure the jury was focused on the main thing, which was the evidence.
Who was your most powerful witness?
And you're asking us to choose from a lot of people. If you're asking me, the answer is Ryan Tuttle. If you're asking the jury, it may have been somebody like Sergeant Bass or somebody like Otis Mallett. But for me, it's Ryan Tuttle.
Did the jury offer any hint about how they reached their decision?
They followed the law. They said repeatedly, they followed the law. And when you follow the law, when you read through the charge, it was very clear.
Both of you are very well prepared individuals. It's obvious. Had he taken the stand, what question would you have asked?
Well, we both smiled because we had an agreement before trial that Tanisha would do the closing statement and I would cross-examine Gerald Goins. And of course,
If I didn't push him into a bus.
of course, we were prepared for that, and it's a good thing you didn't.
What question would you have asked?
Well, I think we've all asked that same question. Why?
This case exposed a lot of the corruption of Gerald Goins, but also of some of the other officers on Squad 15. But do you think that your investigation in this case and the other cases has rooted out that corruption, or do you think that that's something that's very difficult to do?
So I think that Keaton and I were focused on Gerald Goins and this particular felony murder conviction. We had a team of other prosecutors who were working on those other cases, and it would be remiss of us to try and even begin speaking about them because they're much better versed than we are in those other cases.
I think Ryan and I would like to address that question about further corruption. Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, this has pointed out a lot of flaws in potentially law enforcement policy, and what we want now is reform. We want, of course, I think I speak for certainly the families, and I would say greater Houston and maybe even larger, that we want every police department to look at their policies. There has to be a change. There has to be a silver lining from the deaths of my father and my stepmother. There has to be some sort of resolve, and I think that's the first place we should start, is what are these policies that led to this? What are the systemic failures that led to this? And, you know, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
There have been a lot of policies that were looked at by the police department and by our agency as the case was investigated. The no-knock warrant policy, the fact that Gerald Goins was assigned and stayed in the narcotics division for decades without transferring out, the fact that certain forms weren't audited on a regular basis dealing with confidential informants. There were many deficiencies noted in HPD's own audit, but it is not a thorough revamping of narcotics enforcement by the City of Houston's police department. That needs to happen, and we look forward to greater protections for our citizens as our police enforce our laws. We ask them to do it, but it has limits, and that's up to leadership to establish those limits, to check on those limits, and to make sure that we always balance the rights of public safety and what our laws are with the individual rights of people to live peacefully in their own homes.
I didn't know if Patricia wanted to say something about.
She's okay.
Okay. I didn't, because you were so good on the stand. I didn't know if you want to say something.
No, I'm
on
fine.
behalf of your-
It's just
Sure.
my mother-in-law.
I know you were waiting to seek justice for John and John.
Actually, she will be 90 years old this Friday. And all she could ever say was, I just want justice for my family. Their names were drugged long enough through the mud. And she survived COVID. She's did everything. And she's still with us. And had she been able to travel, but she couldn't, doctor's orders, she couldn't leave home. But she was with us and called, and we spoke to her every day. And my daughter has notified her, and all she could say was, thank you, God, that justice has been served. And my daughter and her husband is not corrupt like they said they were.
What do you, and I know you said you wanted to be here to finish the job that John started.
Correct.
Can you talk to us about that?
My husband, in the beginning, was totally involved with everything that happened. When we were notified the Tuesday morning, he couldn't believe it. And his first words, and I'll never forget them, was, "Sweetie, we cannot go up against Houston PD." And I looked at him and I said, "But why?" And he said, we just can't do it. And there was one man that was a very good friend of ours, and he said, "John, it's corrupt. You got to get it done. You got to fight." And he did till his last breath. And I solely believe that his last breath was taken away from him due to all the stress that he went through for the 3 years that he lived through it all. But, you know, I'm doing it for him, and I'd have never dreamed it'd have been me standing here, not him.
Keith and Tanisha, following up on her comment there, she talked about, and I remember your husband. And
Thank you.
I've interviewed him a few times. This was about exposing public corruption. This was about exposing the corruption of Gerald Goins and what took place there that day. And the family wanted answers. In reviewing everything in the last 5 weeks, there was one instance, though, that I think people have questions that I received. So these are Houstonians asking this question. Why did the state not present Acevedo, the former HPD chief, saying, turn off your body cams? If this was about exposing corruption, why did we have to hear that from the defense and not the two prosecutors?
Yeah, I think this case was about Gerald Goins, and when he said that, this case is about Gerald Goins, and when Acevedo said that, that was 40 minutes after 2 individuals had been murdered in their own homes. And the truth is, that wasn't pertinent to the discussions this jury had to have in that deliberation room. That may be pertinent to you, but it wasn't pertinent to those 12 jurors.
Thank you all very much.
Mind if we get the pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the one I want y'all to start using. Get rid of those driver's license ones.
Put it right there. There you go. Just hold it right there.
How do you feel?
Justified. Y'all got it? Okay. Yeah, please use this photo. This was their wedding day photo. And thank you for your suggestion. He gave me the roadmap.
Only murder conviction of an HPD or any law enforcement officer in Houston's history
Thank you.
for on-the-job activity. It's historic, it's nationwide, and we hope other victims who may have been wrongfully accused, incarcerated, we hope they're motivated by this family's courage to come forward.
Thank you. Can I say something to the media? This doesn't need to go anywhere, but I speaking for myself and I know the family, we really do appreciate you guys' continued respect to our situation, our privacy, but for continuing to keep this story alive. That added that pressure that I know was helpful. So I appreciate to all of you that have put this story in a respectful light, and our heads and hearts go out to you guys as well. Thank you.